Welcome back to another episode of the Junior Future Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Luis Duque. I have Nicolai here with me again. How are you doing, Nicolai?
Doing great, doing good. It's another great Thursday morning.
Yeah, I'm excited about this conversation we're gonna have because things have changed a lot. I think over the last couple of years in terms of like how I manage things. I've done some paper planning in the past, some just kind of digital planning, some note taking. So I think it's kind of interesting to hear kind of how things change. And I think how I think about it is if it's not serving a purpose right now, I just need to find something else. And obviously, it's hard when you have everything in one place and then you move to a different one. So there's some downsides and everything. But I wanted to touch on kind of that conversation in terms of like how do you do your planning? I think more specifically, just kind of the journal in terms of like I think we talked about in the past about journaling for just kind of clarity and your own kind of personal journaling. But I think the engineering side of it, it's super important, especially as you get into bigger projects that require a lot of information and having a kind of good record of everything that's happened. So kind of curious to hear what you have in mind for that as well, just kind of your process right now.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to talk about this and how we kind of keep a record of projects and notes and just people we talk to and all of that. Like, how do you keep it all together? I think when you're working on projects, and I think especially this is going to come in to be helpful when you're working on multiple projects at once, or when you're working on one project for a really long time, because sometimes you might be working on a project that's 12 to 18 months long or longer, and you need to recall something that you talked about 6 months ago. And if you don't do a really good job of record keeping or kind of keeping your own journal, yes, I know that there's meeting minutes and stuff like that, but how many conversations and impromptu meetings are there that don't have official meeting minutes that you really need to be keeping track of? So I'm excited to have this conversation. I know that when we talked about goals, we kind of talked about having a journal, and that's more on the personal side too. I still encourage everybody to take some time and, every day. I will admit I do not do this every day. I definitely do it every week where I'm kind of doing my reflection. But, every day, if I can think of who did I help today and did I conduct myself with excellence or operate with excellence today? Those are two questions I like to ask myself. That's kind of just my gut check on how the day went or how the week went. So I still encourage people to do that on a personal basis. But when it comes to projects, I used to be hardcore paper. And I know we've had this conversation, I think a year or more ago, and I only used a paper journal. I had my planner, my calendar. I know I had an Outlook calendar, and I used that for all my reminders. But I was really heavy on paper, and I'll let you know, I've definitely gone away from that, and I miss it so much. There's just so much, like, my brain remembers things better when I write it down physically, right? If I'm glancing at a screen or I type something into a screen, just doesn't have that same connection to my memory as when I'm writing down. So I've done this for about a year and a half now, where I've kind of gone away from paper. I still got to figure it out. I'm still playing around with different things. I mean, what have you changed before we get into specifics? I guess, what are you doing now? Are you doing a combination of both? Are you still using Notion?
Yeah, I think last time we talked, I was gonna maybe experiment a little bit with paper, and that lasted a while. I think it's probably the longest kind of stretch of paper planning that I've done. And I went back and forth a little bit in between. And again, like you said, right now I miss it a little bit. I kind of like the writing down things on paper, and I've been enjoying just kind of getting nice fountain pens and pens that just feel good in the hand with good paper, and it's great. But the issue with that was I was struggling to keep everything organized, and it requires a little more maintenance to kind of write down. And then I was kind of following the bullet journal method, which I think we talked about the last time, where you can have an index and then you keep things organized that way. You reference pages, and then it was kind of getting a lot more cumbersome than I wanted it to be. So I eventually moved back, and I think maybe like once I switched jobs a few months ago, I was like, okay, this is the perfect chance. I'm kind of starting fresh in a new job and have the opportunity to start something new. So that's kind of when I decided to go back to Notion. Um, and I really like, there's this video, I will try to find it and link it, from Tiago Forte. He talks a lot about like second brain and like information management and all of that. And there's like different characteristics that an app or a system needs to have. And I think one of those is being able to search it easy. Obviously, paper is going to be really hard to search something. But having the digital planning aspect of it, I can keep everything organized. So I have a project page that I can have notes and tasks and any codes that I need to reference for that project and anything that is related to that specific project in one dashboard that is there. And it all functions with databases and kind of filtering stuff, so I can only see what's specific to that project, which is amazing. So that's kind of where I am right now, just kind of switching back to more that digital aspect. And yeah, just kind of giving it another try. I've gone on and off in the past. I've struggled a lot in the past. Just like you said, I think just kind of when you're in the computer the whole day and you kind of sometimes we get numb of just kind of being on the computer and typing and all that. Like the paper planning is a little nicer, just kind of outside of your kind of work.
For many years, I had my planner, which was my calendar. I look at my week ahead, and it's a physical planner, and then I take all my notes in there. On top of that, I had a piece of paper that I kept at my desk. I mean, every week I would take a new piece of paper, and I have a digital copy. We should maybe put it in our show notes, and we'll throw it out for people to see if they want to use it. But I literally would print this piece of paper every single week, and I would always keep them. Like I would have a 3-ring binder full of over 100 of these things because it was every week. And on the one side it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Kind of all these bullet points of things that come up or maybe what I need to take care of that day. It wasn't so much of like project notes or something like that, but it's kind of my task list for that day. On the one side in the corner, I would say these are my main things I need to get done this week. So maybe it's a submittal or a QC or whatever it needs to be. Things that I delegated. So I want to keep track of things that I've given to other people and who I need to follow up with, and maybe when I need to follow up with them. And then, things come up, like somebody comes to my desk and says, hey, I need this. It's not urgent. Well, if it's not urgent, everything that is urgent is probably going to be, first. So, but I don't want to forget what that person told me. So I had a deferred until later, section, just because it was like, all right, don't want to forget it, but I don't really want to use any brain power thinking about this thing. So I would have that on my desk every single week. And, I've led some workshops for Engineering U, and I have given this piece of paper to many people, and they've told me they still use it, which I love. I love it that they still use it. We hired somebody here at Jacobs a few months ago, and he says he still uses this thing, and I thought that was really cool. But anyway, so I took that. So I took that piece of paper, and now that I'm dealing with more projects, more meetings, more just more volume of things I need to document and write down, I've kind of taken that template and made it into a OneNote. Mm-hmm. And I have a OneNote template. So every week on Monday or Friday, the week before, I'll go in and make a copy of it and kind of start to populate a little bit. Now, my Fridays and Thursdays are typically not touched until 2 or 3 days before those days. But by Monday morning, or even before I start my day on Monday, it typically has some things on it. So I come in and I know exactly what I'm starting with on Monday. And so then I'll have, project 1, project 2, project 3. And so I'll just kind of go through and, whatever project meeting or conversation I had or whatever task I did, I'll write it down. So that's kind of how I'm keeping track of my project diaries, if you want to call it that. We've talked about Friday 5s at 5, where I take 5 minutes at 5 p.m. or whatever time I cut out for the day on Fridays, and I review my week, and I kind of look at the week ahead, because I want to make sure that I come in on Monday like ready to go. Right. I don't want to come in on Monday and spend the first hour think, okay, what do I need to do, or who do I need to talk to? Like I want to have a plan as soon as I come in. I'm more effective and productive that way.
Yeah, I was going to add, you probably saw me go and grab something from the shelf up here, which is what I keep these, I think we talked about before, the traveler journals. So I was going to show just kind of what I love just kind of the format. And again, I can keep them, if you're watching the video, just in these binders. They just kind of clip in there, which is awesome. And I was going to just open up a random week, just kind of exactly what you're talking about. I just have a week, and then I just take kind of note what I'm
Oh yeah.
doing. A lot of times this is like tasks and stuff like that, but I usually don't do it too often. Sometimes it's just like a reflection, or if there's any habits that I'm tracking. So it changed a lot over the past couple of years. But again, I enjoyed the habit of just kind of sitting down and doing that for a little bit. And I usually do it on Sundays with my wife, kind of talking about, hey, what does the week look like? When you have four kids that have activities, they have stuff going on, and sometimes it gets a little challenging. But I was finding out that I was writing it here, which was great. But at the same time, I was kind of moving everything back to the calendar, and I was kind of revising that throughout the week. I was just kind of writing it down and just kind of forgetting it until the next Sunday when I'm going to look at it. So I feel like there was a lot of maybe like missed opportunities to, I don't know, it felt nice to do it, but I wasn't using it fully. I was always just relying on my calendar. So I figured, hey, just give digital a try again, put everything on the calendar. I like just like time blocking and keeping everything organized, and just kind of maybe even link my tasks from Notion to the calendar, and kind of seeing everything in one place, kind of what I'm doing. So that's kind of where everything started. Just again, I have like monthly calendars where I just kind of map out the month, and it's great to see everything. But I wasn't using it for like the purpose, just kind of seeing it every week and that. So that's kind of where I ended up. I don't know if you had like similar experience in terms of just maybe your planning in terms of like events, calendar events, and all of that. For me, it was challenging, and I see the value in the paper more into just kind of brainstorming and just having big picture ideas of just kind of being able to write down, have the freedom to do that. And I still do it a lot on my netbook. You can probably see it up on the shelf. It's just like right here. But when you get into the actual working and the production of just kind of the project, keeping everything organized in one place has been super, super amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so on a daily basis, the amount of meetings or conversations I have has definitely grown, and so keeping things in one place has been difficult. So having my work week template where I just every note goes into there for the week, but then on Fridays when I'm doing my summaries, I'll go through and project one. Every time I wrote something down for project one, I'll copy all that text and I'll move it to a separate folder where I have all of project one notes and project information and calendars and all of that. Project two, I'll take all of that and I'll move it there. So that way, like I have my week where I brain dump and info dump everything into it, but then I organize it on Friday before I finish my day. So yeah, I mean, it's been effective for the last year and a half or so. I've gotten small improvements here and there. I think there's no perfect way. I have yet to find the perfect scenario here, and I've been actively looking for the perfect scenario for years, and I think it's good for the listeners to know there's no perfect thing, but there is something that works for you, and don't let us sway you to only use digital or only use paper. Maybe it is a mixture of things. I feel like I really do want to go back and incorporate some of the paper journal or planning things. Just again, I'm just finding that it's not solidifying in my memory when I'm typing in something. I find myself having to go back and referencing my notes just to remind myself what that note was. But whereas where I wrote it down, I could tell you something 2-3 weeks later about something that I wrote down. There's got to be science behind that. I don't know what it is, but that's something I'm missing. So there's no perfect way. We keep trying new things, but I think the important thing too is if you've never done something, I want to talk to the listeners here. If they're like, man, well, I've never done this before, start small. I mean, I know that is like the least inspiring, thing I could tell somebody, but I'm telling you, start small, start easy, because you're going to try 5 new things and then you're going to give up on all of them, right? And if you start small, the least you can build on it. Whereas and you get a momentum, you get you get a routine and a habit built first. Then you can grow on it. But don't try 5 new things at once, So that would be my advice for somebody. I feel like I say start small a lot, but
It's good
it's
advice.
helpful. Yeah, it is. It is. It's not exciting. It's not sexy advice, that's for sure. It's just, but it's more helpful than than not saying that.
Right. Yeah. And I think that just kind of brings me back to like Atomic Habits, which I'm sure you read many times and heard of it at least. Yeah, just kind of starting small, creating the habit first in terms of looking at these either, hey, Word document works great, Google Doc, piece of paper to start, just write things throughout the week. Just kind of write it down on a piece of paper and then just look at it at the end of the week. Like what things are important, which things I need to move to projects, which things need to happen next week. And you start slow like that. And again, this is something that I've thought about, I done for as long as I can think of back to college. And it changes often. I go back to paper, I go back to digital. Maybe I sometimes switch apps, which I don't love because then I need to switch information. Sometimes they don't match. So there's a lot of challenges with that. And what I enjoy is just making sure at the time I am putting the effort to just make it good and work for me at the time. And there's stretches where it's a month. There's stretches which is a year and a half, which was this kind of last kind of paper experiment. And again, there is no right or wrong answer right here. I think it's important to realize that when you find a system, just stick with it for as long as you can. If you're anything like me, you're gonna get bored at some point. You're gonna switch it. But if you kind of build a habit of like, no matter what, I'm gonna stick with this, and maybe you find a tool. I think that's kind of one of the things I just keep gravitating towards Notion, is because whenever I get bored of a view or a system, I can switch it out within Notion, and I'm not losing any information. I'm not losing my projects, my notes, my task, anything. I'm just switching how it looks, how it feels, how it functions. And again, things change. You may function differently, may think differently, and at the end of the day, I think it needs to be working for you. I want to touch on something before we end the episode. It's just kind of your perspective. I think you have obviously a few more years of experience, but just kind of the importance of keeping that journal in terms of, hey, I'm a young engineer, maybe I don't have a lot going on, but like how can I start building that habit to keep track of projects? I'm sure you can keep track of the budget, the timeline, you have people you're managing. There's a lot of stuff a lot of moving parts that as a young engineer, you don't have to deal with. But if you build a habit of keeping a journal, making sure you have all the information, the key either assumptions for a project or at least an idea of the timeline that has happened, what is kind of your advice for anyone that is kind of looking to build a habit?
Oh man. Okay. So I think having one place that kind of holds everything. So let's just say project one. You have project one, you're working on that, but you have multiple days worth of notes and multiple things where maybe you wrote it down physically, maybe you wrote it down on a notepad, or you opened up a Word document, and you have all these things scattered. That you should always have something where it's like a home base for all of your notes that you're going to summarize everything there. As you know, earlier in your career, you're not as focused on the scope, schedule, and budget like your project manager is. But maybe have a little, side tab that says, these are things that I observed from those people that are a few years or multiple years ahead of me. And I just want to like save this little nugget. Like this PM handled this situation this way, and I want to make sure I remember that. And maybe just kind of have kind of like a lessons learned tab. I would also say then, when you have certain milestones, talk to your lead on the project, maybe the lead engineer or the lead PM, and just say, hey, we just had this milestone. I would love to know, like, what are things that I did well that I can continue to improve? And then what are things that I can improve right now? Just like maybe I dropped the ball, but I want to do better next time. And then you write that down and you put it in your lessons learned. Celebrations, write down those things that you did well, and like, hey, these are the values that I brought. Now that can even go further on your annual reviews, where now you have all these things, but you're building this case where you're learning, you're figuring out all these things that you're putting into kind of your engineering toolbox, right? Because I mean, you're a sponge those first few years, and I feel like I'm still a sponge. I don't think it ever ends, but your sponge is more on the technical side of things when you're earlier on, and you just want to make sure you like I learned this, or I did this, and now I have this skill set, and this is what I want to do, or I really enjoyed this side of things. Like just keeping track of all those things, because when you start to get in the race of project to project to project to project, you just forget. And then you look back a year later and you're like, man, what did I actually get out of this year? But this journal or journals will definitely help you to remember and reflect and just show like I did grow this year. And that's pretty cool. It's really fun to look back on a year's worth of notes and see, wow, I really did stuff.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's something that it stuck to my mind. I listened to this from someone that I'm really good friends with now. I didn't know him well at the time. I want to say it was maybe 8 years ago. One of the pieces of advice he's had is keeping a list, a database, a Word document, anything with a list of questions. So you're never asking a question twice. So think about like how many times you are doing a project, like, hey, where can I find this document? Write it down. When you get the answer, write the answer down. And if you ever have that question again, if you keep asking the same question, like I think that's a lot of times maybe like, I don't want to say like bad thing, but if you show that you kind of keep track of that stuff, that's going to show a lot to your manager, to your works and everything. So I love that idea. That's something I still do to this day, where I have a database of like questions I don't know, I don't remember how I call it, but just kind of having that list is super fun to see how, again, it grows, and then you can start to see how those questions start changing as you kind of mature in your career. Like at the beginning, maybe like, hey, how do I find this information? But now you're maybe thinking a little deeper, like what happens if we change this piece of design, and what's the consequences for like the bigger team? So like you start thinking about these, and you can start seeing kind of your progress and your thought process, and it kind of helps you, as well as it helps you just kind of become more curious about your work, your career, anything. And I think just kind of keeping track of that. That's something that I remember, like it stuck to my mind since the moment I heard that. And I thought that was super interesting. Anything else you want to share? I think we're kind of at the end here, but yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we could talk about in terms of journaling, keeping track of information and all that. But I think at the end of the day, it's kind of what you said, is all depends on you. And I think the only person that knows what system works for them, it's you. So make sure you experiment, you try things around. Feel free to reach out to us. I love talking about this. I may even do a solo episode in the future on like how I manage things, and put it up on YouTube or something. And yeah, just feel free to reach out. Do you have anything else, Nicolai?
I would just ask if you're listening to this and you have done something that we haven't touched on. I'm always looking for new ideas. Luis is always looking for new ideas. So let us know what you've done. Let us know what tools you're using. I'll let you know. Like I just learned that Microsoft Teams has a built-in AI feature that can help you kind of summarize your meetings. I have no idea how to use it, but it's something I'm going to start looking into, see if it can help me. So if you have ideas like that or things that you've done, man, I would be all ears. So that's the only thing I'd like to say.
Yeah, and I'll leave that link. I think we have a form where people can either submit questions about the podcast. I'll add maybe a section in terms of like suggestions or anything for you to just put it there. I think that's, again, I love hearing from people. When I published the first episode, I think it was like 3-4 weeks ago after the long break, I got messages like, oh, it's great to see you again. I love reading the newsletter. So that's always just super encouraging and super fun to kind of continue seeing that. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, you're going to love the content we have over our newsletter. Every issue comes packed with information about the episode that we recorded, giving you detailed action items, as well as just reflection on some of the things that you could apply in your career, in your life. And I always enjoy sitting down on a Sunday, Saturday sometimes, and writing down each newsletter. Comes packed with a lot of information, a lot of links, a lot of great lessons and knowledge that we share both in the podcast, but I'll try to go a little deeper into that connection. So if you're interested in that at all, go to luisfelipeduque.com/newsletter. All the information is there. I'm excited for the podcast and where it's going. So I want you to know about that resource as well. Nicolai and I put a lot of effort in the podcast, and we're enjoying the conversations. And as well, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, go to the link in the description below, or luisfelipeduque.com/contact, and let's connect. We're happy to provide you with all the information you need, and always excited to have that conversation as well.
Thank you, Jack Windes, for the music. And as always, let's continue engineering our future.